Hi, everyone. So, today I'm going to talk about a mistake that I made once. And this is a story that some of you may have heard. So, if you've heard it, feel free to just skip today or you can rehear it. But I tell this story a lot because I think that it's something that I see happen a lot. And also, I don't want anybody to go through what I went through because it's such an easier way. You don't have to take the very, very, very long path that I took. There's a much more direct route to get to what you want. And the story was this. So when I got my first dog, Irie, I was just completely in love with her. I was kind of obsessed with her. I thought she was the cutest. She was the cutest. I mean, she was so cute. We got her DNA tested and it said she was, what did it say? It said she was like half Portuguese water dog, half Dalmatian, and like 1/8 Pekingese. But if you saw her, she looked like a little corgi. So do with that, who knows what she really was. But she was so, 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 so cute. And when I got her, I I am a dog lover. I was a dog lover then. She was the first dog that I had that was mine. She was my dog, and she was also my baby, and I loved her. And she was like my child. So I talked about this a little bit, I think maybe last week or the week before, but I literally would do anything, give anything to that dog. We went to training classes all the time. She had every toy under the sun. I mean, our house was like a pet store. It was like, well, I guess it was an apartment at the time, but it was like a pet store. It was like every dog toy you could imagine, every dog bed, every squeaky tennis ball. She had like more hair accessories than I have. She had like multiple different brushes. She had like the slicker brush, and she had the bristle brush, and then she had the pin brush, and then she had the flea comb, and it was like everything was like that. Like she didn't just have one thing, she had all of the things. And I felt like by buying her all of the things that I could make her feel happy. And that really made me happy. Like I just wanted her to be happy. So I just bought her everything. And I let her sleep in bed with me every night, and she could often be found just right on top of my lap. And if she threw her toy at me, I would throw it for her. And if she barked at me, I would look at her and I would say, What's wrong? What's wrong? What do you want to do? And she would bark, and I would say, Do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to go for a walk? And she'd bark and wag her tail, and I'd put her on her leash and I'd take her for a walk. And that's pretty much how our days went. And I was really well intentioned, but it just wasn't the right path, because what happened from that experience was that she didn't actually become this really like happy, chill dog. That's not what happens to dogs when you do that. They don't just become these happy dogs who chill out and love everybody and love everything. What happens is they become kind of edgy, and they become kind of territorial sometimes, and they become um, kind of anxious. And that is definitely what happened to her. So she became territorial, and we lived, gosh, so long ago, but I think we lived on like the 11th floor at that time. But it was an apartment in Woodley Park in DC, which is a really busy neighborhood. But every time she would hear somebody in the hallway, she would bark. I mean, like a neighbor would open their door down the hallway, and she would just like run to the door because she would know that something was coming. And then as soon as they would walk by our apartment, she would go, "Bow, bow, bow, bow." Or if the elevator would ding, that was also her cue, right? Then she would run to the door, "Bow, bow, bow, bow." And it depended. Like it was like she didn't like men as much as she liked women. So the men had to like, if it was a man in the hallway, I was like, oh gosh, she's going to bark. Or if there was like a strange noise, like if somebody had a lot of packages or something, I knew it was like, oh gosh, we're going to have extra barking today. So she would bark at people in the hallway. She would also bark at me when I left her. So if I left the apartment, like I call it separation anxiety because I like it was like I left her and she would bark, but there's also this super territorial component to it, right? So it was also like she had separation anxiety, but it was also that I would leave her and she would, I guess not territorial, but she would demand to bark. Like she would be on the other side of the door barking at me with this entitlement and this confidence of rawr, 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 like that, like get back here right now and come get me. You know, she hated to be left. And what else would she do? Oh, so many things. And when I would walk her, she was this little fluffy 15, 16-pound dog. And when I would walk her, she would lunge at and bark at other dogs. Not all dogs. Again, she had very strong preferences. Like some dogs were fine, other dogs not fine. I remember we ended up moving from that apartment in Woodley Park to another apartment building that had like this glass door and by where we had to pick up our mail. And if she saw other dogs outside of the glass, just walking down the sidewalk, she would lunge at and hit the glass, barking and growling and just acting like she was this big, tough Rottweiler. And so she'd bark at other dogs. I would take her to because I was like trying, I loved her, right? And I was like trying to make her so happy. And so I would take her to, and by the way, if you're listening to this, definitely, I forgot to mention earlier, drop me a like or drop a comment that I know that you're listening to this. I'd love to know that I'm talking to somebody, and I hope some of you catch us on the replay. I realize this is like a weird time to do lives, but just with my schedule and the kids, this is what's working right now. And hopefully later I can do some stuff in the afternoons, but hopefully this is still fun or helpful for some of you who catch it on the replay. But so she would bark at other dogs. She had the separation anxiety, right? She would bark at the people in the hallways. She had the territorial stuff. I mean, the territorial stuff was like the people in the hallway, but like, goodness, somebody help him if somebody comes if somebody came into our apartment, right? If like a maintenance person had to come into our apartment, I would have to put her in she didn't even have a crate because I didn't really crate her. So she had like one of those travel bags. And so I would have to zip her up in the travel bag and she would just like barking and lunging from within the travel bag at the maintenance person in our home who was there to fix whatever. So she wasn't great with other dogs. She was territorial. Nobody could come in our apartment that she didn't like. Friends were a different story. But maintenance people are people she decided she didn't like. And then I would bring her to the dog park because I just had this ideal scenario in my mind that like that a dog loved the dog park, that it would be fun for her to go to a dog park, that she was a dog, therefore she must love going to the dog park to play with other dogs. But she didn't really. So most of the time when we were at the dog park, she would like find something to guard and then she would be protecting it from the other dogs. And that's the other thing. She would protect things from me. So she had like this, we would joke because if she found socks anywhere, she would just like take the socks and run away and hide with them. And if you tried to get the sock back, she would growl or snap at you. Occasionally she would like maybe like bite, but mostly it was growling and snapping. It wasn't very pleasant. So she would do all of those things. And, you know, it took me a long time to relate the two things, right? Like it took me a long time to realize that all of the loving her that I was doing which was really just being super permissive with her, was contributing at all to this other behavior. Like, I just thought that's who she was. I just thought that she was that kind of dog. Like, those were her issues. She was territorially aggressive. She had separation anxiety. That was her issue. Like, she didn't like other dogs, and it didn't have anything to do with me. It didn't have anything to do with the fact that she slept in my bed and that she looked at me and went, "Rah," and I took her for a walk. I never connected the two things. And so, yeah, so it just took me a long time. I'm a slow learner. So it took me a long time. And I thought she just needed training. So I went to our local pet superstore and I signed her up for a 6-week training class. And I took her through basic manners. And she did great. I mean, she did really well in the class. No dogs can get close to us, right? Because if I was feeding her treats and another dog came close to us, she would try to go after them. At the time, I didn't even realize. Like, now I know. I'm like, that probably wasn't the best setting for her. But at the time, I didn't even know. And then she graduated that class. And then I took the advanced class with her. She graduated that class. I took the tricks class with her. She graduated that class. So I felt like I was training her. And then that's why I felt like these other things didn't have anything to do with me. Like, and it had to do with her, because I'm like, I trained her. Like, I don't know. This is just part of who she is. And so, but it wasn't until like much later, like years after I got her and she had all these issues, that I started to realize, like, oh, like, I started to finally connect the dots, because that's when I started getting really into training and behavior. And that's when I started becoming really interested in trying to help her be less anxious, less fearful, less aggressive. And I started to realize that some of the things that I was doing, some of these really permissive things, were contributing to her personality, or her behaviors at that time. So as I started to shift, as I started to change, the training piece alone did not do it. I wish that it did, but it didn't. So if you follow me on my podcast, definitely check out the last 2 podcast episodes. If this is at all like applies to you and your dog, or if it is at all interesting to you, check out the last 2 podcasts, because I just did podcast on structure and boundaries. And well, I guess it was the most recent podcast that you should check out. It's the Structure and Boundaries podcast, because that's going to give you a framework. If you're dealing with any sort of behavior issue, that's going to give you a framework that you can use to get started, so that you don't have to deal with these issues as long as I did with my first dog. And so once you have the structure and the boundaries in place, and once you start shifting your mindset about what it means to love your dog, then you start seeing massive results. You start seeing massive changes in their behavior. So, it's kind of challenging for us to think about, because I think it doesn't come naturally to a lot of us. I think culturally, we don't always get like the right message about like how best to love our dogs. Like, culturally, I guess, with like all of the advertisements and like all of the marketing influence that we get all the time from dog food companies and pet stores and pet food companies and all of that, we get this message that if we love our dogs, we're going to do all these things. It's going to be doggy Disneyland every day, with toys and homemade dog food, special meal deliveries with their name on the package, and the dog's going to sleep in our bed, and then in the same commercials, the dog's always really happy and loves everybody, right? Like, in the same commercials, the dog's like galloping around with the family and and other dogs, and the dog is just like so happy and well trained. And I'm not saying don't do all of those things, like buy your dog toys and I'm all for it. Feed your dog the best quality of food that you can afford. But it's just that permissive piece that I think that we need to look at, and that's the part I think that's the mistake that I made with my first dog big time, is I was just super permissive with her. I was not a good leader for her. I was not a good guide for her. I didn't want to lead her. I didn't. I didn't want to be in charge of anybody. I was more comfortable with letting her call the shots, right? So I didn't want to be responsible for somebody else at that time. Like, I didn't want to manage her. I didn't want to set a schedule. I didn't want to be the one who was responsible for saying, like, when she needed to go out, when she needed to be fed, where she needed to sleep. And I didn't want to deal with that. Like, if she barked at me, I didn't want from her, like, for example, like if I was going to have her sleep overnight in a crate, I didn't want to deal with that she might bark at me and she might be sad. I didn't want to deal with disappointing her. I didn't want to deal with that confrontation or that conflict with her. I just wanted us to have this super happy, easy relationship. And she was happy sleeping in my bed. Happy, she did like it. Was it what was best for her overall? No, it wasn't. But at the time, I wasn't ready to step up and to be her leader. And so now I know. And hopefully this live helped you, or I keep putting this message out there because I think this message is so important. I mean, I think so many of us with our dogs, I think we get the training piece. We get the sit, the down, the stand, the stay, the calm, all that stuff is straightforward. I think we get that piece. The piece that's harder to grasp, the piece that is harder to implement, the piece that doesn't come as naturally to a lot of us, especially those of us who are super empathetic and dog lovers, is the leadership piece. The structure, the boundaries is the piece where you're saying, okay, I'm going to do what's best for her in the long term, even if today she's unhappy. That's the piece that a lot of us, I think, are just, we are at our maximum capacity with life, between, I don't know, this might not describe you. So if it doesn't, just ignore this part. But I think a lot of us are at maximum capacity. It's like we are working full time. It's coronavirus. Some of us have kids. Some of us have another dog. Some of us want 5 minutes to ourselves. It's like we have these other things going on. And particularly if you have a young dog or a puppy, young dogs and young puppies can be extremely high needs. I mean, raising any sort of young animal, if you're really focusing on what the animal needs, it's a huge responsibility and it's a huge amount of time and it's a huge amount of mental energy that you're going to spend doing that. So if you feel like I did with my first dog, I think I don't think I put that all together, and now I realize that probably that was really overwhelming for me at the time. So instead, I just did what felt good and what felt non-confrontational and what I thought would make her happy. And then once I started to realize that that was actually contributing to her problems and that was actually making her more anxious, more stressed, more aggressive, then I could start to make the shift. And then I started to make the shift and I realized that by implementing structure and boundaries and leadership, by being more of her parent than her friend, I was able to really help her work through a lot of that stuff. Now, she was still Irie. She was still Irie for 15 years. But I would say, like, the last half of her life, she was less anxious. She was less aggressive. She was less stressed. It wasn't because I stopped bringing her to the dog park. Like, she didn't like doing that. So I stopped bringing her to the dog park. I stopped having her sleep in my bed. That's going to reduce your territorial aggression really fast. And that's a huge contributor to that. So lots of little things. So yeah, if any of you out there are struggling with that, you are not alone. It's not easy whenever you're dealing with a dog who has any sort of behavioral challenge. I'm not talking obedience, I'm talking behavior. And if you're dealing with a dog who has any sort of behavioral challenge, it's not easy. And then we get like all these conflicting messages with all this marketing and just culturally, and it can feel frustrating because it can feel like, well, I bought all the toys, I took all the training classes, I did all the things, and she's still barking at people in the hallway. She still doesn't let maintenance people come into my house. She's still not nice to some of the dogs she meets. She is still has separation anxiety when I leave. Why the heck is that happening? And I'm here to tell you, it's not your fault, because we get this message to do it one way. We get this message that if we just love them, if we just give them all these things, they're going to be well behaved. But the reality is something totally different, right? So if this describes you at all, or if you found today's podcast at all helpful, if you know somebody who would, definitely give this a like, or send me a message. If you don't feel comfortable talking about your dog's behavior issues in public, you can send me a direct message. Let me know what's going on. I would love to help you. And there is help out there. Your dog can totally, if you're dealing with any sort of behavior issue, your dog can totally get better. Like, that does not have to be the way that it is. And you don't have to struggle at it, and you don't have to do it by yourself, and you don't have to try to Google it or YouTube it or whatever else, Instagram it, podcast it, and then try to like reconcile all of the different things that you're hearing. Because I'll tell you, you probably know this. Maybe I'll do a whole separate live on this, because I was thinking about that this week. I actually posted my Facebook group. I'm like, the amount of conflicting information that's on the internet about dog training is just staggering, right? Like, you will go to one place and it's going to be like, when your dog's fearful, don't pick it up. And then you go to another place and it's like, if your dog's fearful and you don't pick it up, you're a monster. Right? So it's like completely different. And trying to navigate all of that is just extremely complex. And I don't even know how people do it, honestly. Like, I don't know how people do it. So, but if you want help, if you want a clear direction, if you have a question or anything like that, feel free to direct message me. If you just watched today's live and you just want to show me some support, definitely leave me a like. And if you want to dive a little deeper on some of the leadership, structure, boundary stuff that we talked about today, definitely check out the latest podcast. It's the Savvy City Dog podcast. I think that you're going to like it a lot, and I think it will give you a lot of concrete things that you can do that will really help. Okay. Well, I hope you all have a wonderful week, and thank you so much for catching this on the replay or being here with me today. And I look forward to catching up again soon. Thanks.